JFK Airport, New York was noisy and crowded early in the morning. Families dragging their suitcases, business people holding their coffees, last-minute rushing passengers, and shoppers in luxury stores. Everything seemed pretty ordinary. Planes were taking off every hour, and passengers were disappearing into the bustle of a regular day. However, that morning, no one knew it would turn into a disaster. In a corner, a man sat wearing a dirty coat, his face and hands covered in grime. Michael had lived on the streets for years, forgotten, a man whose face no one looked at. Years ago, he had left his family and had to fight every day just to survive. He could no longer remember anything but the life he had lived. His eyes held an indescribable fear and hopelessness. At that moment, whatever was about to happen would happen. But somehow that morning, he was going to change the lives of the passengers and the 400 people on that plane. Keep watching this video because an ending that will truly surprise you is coming. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to follow our page and like this video. Everything is just getting started. In the crowded airport, no one noticed Michael. No one knew his past, the pain he had endured, or the family he had left behind. People looked at him with mocking gazes, and some even pulled out their cameras, laughing. Another homeless man hanging out at the airport. A few passengers were recording the moment on their phones. No one could have guessed that this man would change their lives in just a few minutes. Michael placed his head in his hands and took a deep breath. At that moment, his eyes locked onto one person in the crowd. Daniel, his son, Daniel, whom he had abandoned years ago, was standing right in front of him at JFK Airport after all these years. The face looked familiar. His eyes still held the same innocent look from years ago. But time had passed, and this man had become a businessman. The painful memories from the past resurfaced. Michael's heart began to race. There was something in his son's eyes, a look that had become so alien, as if he didn't recognize him anymore. Michael tried to approach his son to introduce himself. However, security personnel quickly started intervening. It was as if, for a moment, Michael could finally open up to the world. But the effects of the life he had lived left him with fear and helplessness. "Daniel, my son, can you hear me?" he shouted. Daniel, stunned by the chaos, turned his head. For a moment, there was a look of shock on his face. Then he quickly turned his head away and lowered it. No one knew what the homeless man's words meant. However, the feeling that something was wrong began to subtly spread through the airport. Michael called out to his son once again. "Son, I swear to you, this plane is going to crash. There's a malfunction on the plane. We need to help." The security guards quickly tried to move Michael away. Some passengers continued to film on their phones, while others were laughing at him with mocking glances. "He sure put on a good show, didn't he?" they laughed. But Michael, oblivious to everything, was pleading desperately. He crawled towards the security guards, getting as close as he could. "Please listen to me. If that plane takes off, you'll all die," he screamed. But the security guards roughly pushed him away, trying to force him out. At that moment, a man caught his attention. Daniel, nervously and confused, was watching Michael. Suddenly, Daniel's eyes once again locked onto Michael. In that moment, he realized the person before him was the man he had once known, the father who had abandoned him. "Dad?" was all he could say, but even speaking that word felt like a reunion. Daniel flinched for a moment, his heart racing. But Michael's plea got lost in the chaos of the airport. Daniel wondered if what Michael was saying was true. However, the firm stance of the security guards and the crowd gave him no chance to dwell on it, and the incident passed without further consideration. As the security guards tugged at Michael to remove him, Daniel couldn't take his eyes off him for a few seconds. "Dad," he whispered, but it went unheard. Then the crowd at the airport resumed as it had before. However, there was a feeling in the air. Something wasn't right. Michael's words, maybe they were true after all. The plane took off from JFK Airport, heading toward Paris. At first, everything seemed fine, but soon the tension inside the plane suddenly increased. The captain's announcement immediately grabbed the attention of all the passengers. Although the flight was expected to proceed normally, the captain's voice came through calm, yet with a distinct hint of concern. "Dear passengers, a technical issue has occurred. We are currently working to bring the situation under control. Please remain calm." This brief statement was enough to fuel doubt and fear among everyone. Daniel felt his heart rate quicken. Sitting next to him, the retired captain, Captain Harris, immediately sensed that something was wrong. With his eyes, he noticed a subtle panic among the cabin crew. The flight attendants, nervously serving tea and drinks to the passengers, exchanged silent glances with each other. They knew something was wrong, but none of them were offering any explanation to the passengers. At first, Daniel tried to hide his fear, but it was inevitable to notice the panic of the other passengers waiting anxiously. Some passengers tightened their seatbelts, while others gazed out the window, attempting to stare vacantly at the passing view outside. But nothing on the plane felt normal anymore. Michael's words echoed in his mind. "If that plane takes off, you're all going to die." As these thoughts grew louder in Daniel's head, the temperature inside the cabin rose. The air grew thicker, and everyone seemed uneasy. After a while, a slight tremor began to shake the plane. At first, it was barely noticeable, but it gradually intensified. The passengers exchanged worried glances, now filled with deep anxiety. Captain Harris leaned against the seat next to Daniel. Trying to stay composed, he made an effort to keep his heart calm. In the meantime, one of the pilots made another announcement. "Dear passengers, we have not yet confirmed any issues, but please continue to keep your seatbelts fastened. Do not worry about us." Harris whispered to Daniel. "This is a real problem. It's not a technical glitch. There's something bigger going on." Daniel's chest tightened. Just then, another jolt shook the plane, and it began to descend slightly. The flight attendants were taking steps back, visibly frantic, but no one was clearly stating why. It was as if there was a mystery, but no one was explaining it. Panic erupted among the passengers. Some were shouting, others were scanning the cabin for security personnel. While some passengers hoped everything would go back to normal, others began voicing their suspicions about the plane's condition. The sudden drop had quickened their heartbeats, but this fear only made the passengers even more uneasy. Suddenly, the lights on the plane began to flicker. It was like a power outage. The flight attendants whispered to each other, but no one could hear what they were saying. The passengers' screams of terror started to fill the cabin. Before long, the condition of the plane rapidly worsened. Another announcement was made. "Ladies and gentlemen, there has been a serious issue with the plane's engines. We are working to regain control of the situation. Please remain calm and assist us so we can continue the flight." This announcement only intensified the panic among the passengers. Some passengers dropped to the floor, praying, while others screamed loudly, searching for an exit. The plane still couldn't stabilize. It felt like it was being tossed around in the air like a weight. The captain's voice sounded wrong, but he spoke so calmly that no one could fully understand what was happening. Suddenly, there was another abnormal jolt on the right wing of the plane. This jolt increased the plane's rate of descent. Passengers started hugging each other. They knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The plane continued its rapid descent as if a catastrophe was approaching. Finally, the plane crashed to the ground with a deafening scream and explosion. After the disaster, Daniel and Captain Harris, along with a few other survivors, managed to escape the wreckage. Everything was a mess. Nothing was clear. Many passengers had lost their lives, and some were severely injured. Daniel had many questions running through his mind. No one knew how the plane had come to this state, whether it had been hijacked or what the real cause of the malfunctions was. But for Daniel and Harris, this tragedy was only the beginning. Now they had to rely on each other to survive. The fear and uncertainty experienced on the plane had deeply affected the passengers' spirits. After the disaster, the survivors began to face the reality that the plane had been hijacked and that the technical failure had only been an excuse. However, there was still much more to be done to uncover the truth. After the crash, a tense silence hung over the wreckage. The atmosphere around everyone had shifted. Nothing would ever be the same again. A few survivors clung to each other, grateful to have made it out alive, but most were seriously injured due to the explosion. The plane had been engulfed in a massive fire, with smoke rising from the rear. The true survivors seemed to have escaped by a miracle. Daniel, weakly managing to free himself from the wreckage, struggled to catch his breath. His heart was pounding in his chest. His eyes quickly scanned the area, and he spotted Captain Harris. Harris appeared to be unharmed, but he was in severe shock, unable to comprehend the meaning of surviving such a harrowing journey. A part of the plane's fuselage had been completely destroyed, while the other part was still enveloped in smoke. Blood, injured passengers, and voices filled the air, all blending together in chaos. Some passengers were calling for help from beneath the wreckage, while others were frantically fleeing in terror. It was overwhelming. Captain Harris made his way toward Daniel. "This is bad, Daniel," he said, panting. "We need to do something. We can't stay here." Daniel shook his head, scanning the wreckage around them. "But where do we go? There are so few survivors. This place isn't safe," he said, panic evident in his voice. Harris paused, taking a deep breath. "You need to understand this. This place is dangerous for the survivors. This is only the beginning. Those who died here, they're only a small part. This plane crash wasn't an accident. We were hijacked, and there's a bigger purpose behind all of this." Daniel looked at Harris in disbelief and took a deep breath. "Were we kidnapped?" he asked, still uncertain in his voice. Harris pointed toward the far corner of the wreckage with his eyes. "Yes, we were kidnapped. This wasn't just a technical malfunction. Everything going wrong on the plane wasn't a coincidence. The pilots avoided telling us the truth, and the flight attendants are hiding something. There's more to this, a plan." As Daniel tried to process the situation, his eyes scanned the other surviving passengers who were closely watching him. A few were struggling to move around the wreckage, wounded. After taking a few steps, the tension between Daniel and Harris grew. Everything was so complicated. Everyone was suspicious, but they needed to focus on something. Harris turned seriously toward Daniel. "The only thing that can get us out of here is information," he said. "But you can't trust anyone here. Someone brought us here. Now we need to figure out what to do next." As the passengers struggled to escape the wreckage with various injuries, a group of the more courageous ones moved toward the far corners of the plane. The survivors quickly decided to head toward the forest several kilometers ahead of the wreckage. Meanwhile, Daniel and Harris, along with others, moved forward, watching the rising smoke behind the plane. But the real question was this an accident or was it part of a plan? A group of injured passengers gathered their courage and decided to join them. For the first time, Daniel felt like the leader of a group. They were trying to reach a safe place, but how would they get there? They were terrified, but they knew they had to move together. As they stepped into the forest, one thought consumed Daniel's mind. Why were they kidnapped? Why had anyone become part of such a dangerous plan? These questions grew in his mind, but soon a sound from deep within the forest broke the silence. Everyone suddenly stopped, holding their breath as they listened to the sound. It was a noise that drowned out the crunch of dry leaves, like the footsteps of someone running. A few of them immediately became silent, and everyone began looking at each other in fear. As the passengers struggled to escape the wreckage with various injuries, a group of the more courageous ones moved toward the far corners of the plane. The survivors quickly decided to head toward the forest several kilometers ahead of the wreckage. Meanwhile, Daniel and Harris, along with others, moved forward, watching the rising smoke behind the plane. But the real question was this an accident or was it part of a plan? A group of injured passengers gathered their courage and decided to join them. For the first time, Daniel felt like the leader of a group. They were trying to reach a safe place, but how would they get there? They were terrified, but they knew they had to move together. As they stepped into the forest, one thought consumed Daniel's mind. Why were they kidnapped? Why had anyone become part of such a dangerous plan? These questions grew in his mind, but soon a sound from deep within the forest broke the silence. Everyone suddenly stopped, holding their breath as they listened to the sound. It was a noise that drowned out the crunch of dry leaves, like the footsteps of someone running. A few of them immediately became silent, and everyone began looking at each other in fear. Someone's there. Daniel's heart began to race. The sound was getting closer. Then a figure, its arms tightly entwined, emerged from the depths of the forest. A small child, weak and trembling, was walking toward them. The child's clothes were soaked in blood, and their eyes were filled with fear as they looked at them. Everyone silently ran to the child's side. The child, breathless, shouted, "Someone's behind me! They're coming! Please help me!" A scream echoed among the passengers. Immediately after, from the depths of the forest, another dark figure appeared, dressed in dark clothes with cuts on its arms and a cold, mocking expression on its face. The child quickly turned to run, but a hand grabbed them. Harris immediately turned to the group around him and quietly said, "We weren't alone here, but everything we need to know will soon be revealed." As they ran, Daniel, Harris, and the other passengers began to experience intense tension within the group. No one could trust anyone anymore. Missing passengers, figures who had secretly left, gunshots, and the anguished screams echoing from the depths of the forest. Everything was becoming too complicated, but the biggest question remained unsolved. Why was someone creating such a massive danger? Harris and Daniel paused for a moment, trying to find a solution. However, solving the problem wouldn't be easy. Meanwhile, on the other side of the forest, a darker figure emerged. This was the place where they were truly trying to survive. In an environment that was becoming increasingly dark and dangerous with every passing moment, the mysteries that needed to be unraveled were multiplying. Suddenly, the sound of a helicopter filled the sky. At first, everyone thought it was just a noise they had imagined. But then, as the helicopter began descending rapidly, its reality was confirmed. People stood in stunned silence, watching. As they tried to escape the depths of the dark forest, it didn't take long for the helicopter to find a spot to land. The helicopter doors opened swiftly, and the first passengers emerged from the forest, making their way toward the chopper. Daniel, Harris, and the other survivors were escorted to safety one by one. The injured were immediately taken by paramedics to the hospital for treatment. Within a few hours, it was confirmed that no one was missing among the survivors, and most of the injured were on their way to recovery. When the survivors of the crash were brought back to the city, their lives were beginning anew. The question marks in his mind still hadn't faded, but Daniel, now in a safe place, surrounded by his family and friends, realized something had become clear. Family was the most important bond in a person's life. No matter what happened, after all the dangers, the pain, and the darkness had passed, the bond with family had to remain strong. These thoughts in his mind strengthened him more than ever before. To survive, he had to be strong, not only physically but emotionally as well. When they came together, the love and trust between them was always above everything else. The most valuable moment of surviving and starting anew was being with your loved ones and never losing them. The people who had once been lost in uncertainty were now stepping out of the dark shadows of the past, embarking on a new beginning. And in that moment, Daniel felt a sense of peace within himself. No matter what, love and family should always be the only true light found at the end of every dark tunnel. If you like this story, don't forget to share it with your friends and subscribe for more content.